Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back. I hope you're having a fantastic summer wherever you might be. We continue to greatly appreciate all of the feedback, the encouragement, the suggestions, as well as the acknowledgments. It's been just really rewarding for people connecting, learning, and growing because of all of our guests so far here in season 2. And today is another special day. I'm excited that Bill's joining us, Bill Waltenbaugh. Many of you all probably know Bill, a wonderful smile. If you've been to any of the appraisal conferences and seminars over the last couple decades, but absolutely just a wonderful human being and a very talented professional. I'm excited for Bill to be joining us. Bill, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. And, I've had a few people tell me, says, why you always smile? And I'm like, well, the alternative isn't as fun, so you might as well smile, right?
I completely agree with you on that. So we're excited to have Bill here with us on Perusing's The Power of Value podcast here in season 2. Bill, we always start out with the same question, and that is, were you born this way, or how did you get into the appraisal and valuation profession?
Certainly a lot of appraisers who have been in the profession as long as I have some type of family connection that they use to get into it. And that's a whole other topic in and of itself these days. Mm-hmm. I guess a lot of people refer to that as one of the reasons why our industry looks the way that it does today.
Oh, you mean you didn't have a family member that just pulled you in? You weren't at the dumb end of the tape measure? You didn't? I
was not. And matter of fact, it wasn't until my college days that I was really even exposed to an appraiser or what the appraisal process was or what it was all about, right? It's really a bit of a story, and it's a crazy story. But I ended up working for the city of Anderson as a zoning administrator assistant or internship in the summer before my sophomore or before my junior year. So between my sophomore and junior year.
Yeah, you, like many college students, need to make some money is what I heard you saying. And
needed to make some money. I'll get into a little bit of the story. Long story short, I was looking for a job. I was all over the place. A friend of mine, we ended up having a few sodas at a certain establishment, and there was a group there that was very interesting. We got to chatting with them. It turns out that they all belong to the work for the zoning department for the city of Anderson. So anyway, I kind of just struck up a conversation with these guys, and they said, well, what are you doing for the summer? I said, I'm looking for a job. And the director said, hey, tell you what, stop on by, and I'm looking to hire an intern. It seems like you're just about as good as anybody else. And so I remembered that he worked for the government, right? But that it had to do with zoning, right? But I was a little confused. And the city of Anderson,
all right,
is the county seat. And so the city building's on this side and the county building's on this side of the street. And so they're on opposite ends of the street. And I ended up going to the county building first. And long story short, I was standing there just kind of looking for the guy's name. I remembered his name. And so anyway, someone come and said, hey, who you looking for? And I told him, I said, you're in the wrong building, across the street. I went in there. He saw me. He hired me right on the spot. And
wow, that smile was pervasive. I mean, right from the start, Bill, that's impressive.
Yeah. So all of that to say that, ultimately, that was my kind of where I started to get my exposure to appraisers, because there were two kind of people that would come into the zoning department back in the late 80s.
Yeah,
and
late 80s.
Right. You couldn't get your information online. I mean, that just simply didn't exist.
No. There was no internet back then, Bill.
So if you wanted zoning and information, you had to come in, and there were two people that came into the zoning department to get zoning information, and that was attorneys and appraisers.
Yes.
And I don't know.
And you didn't become an attorney?
I didn't.
Oh.
You know what? Those are the two choices. I thought the appraisers were cooler. I liked them. They were nothing bad about attorneys or anything else.
All right. A little thumbs up to the real estate.
But I thought they were pretty. So that's where I kind of got my, know what appraiser did, because I'd ask them, I said, why are you getting this information? And they started telling me,
Okay.
Long story short, I went back and did that the following summer, and at the end, between my senior year, they wanted me to stay on full time. I said, look, I'm a student. The director loved me so much, he figured out a way where I could get full-time benefits and work for them. But, he said, when you need to go to class, go to class. And when you're not in class, come here. I'll pay you the hours you work. And so it was a great full year that I got to work there as a zoning administrator. But it was after
But Bill, here you are, just to set the stage for everybody. You're a college student. I mean, you're making sure that you're staying hydrated and filling your brain with good stuff along the way, or some stuff along the way. I don't know if it's good or not. And other people, maybe like me, worked in food service in the dining hall, and here you are working it as a zoning administrator. I mean, that's a little sexier than, I guess, being serving some grub on a tray as people are walking by.
It was very interesting, and I got to learn a lot about zoning law. I got to learn a lot about local government.
Wow.
It was a great, job to have during that time. And obviously, or at least the expectation was from the directors, once I graduated, I would stay on with the city and work as a zoning administrator. I had realized shortly after graduation, maybe even a little before, that this wasn't something I really wanted to do. Like, for nothing against that. It's just, I was like, hey, I had bigger aspirations and other things I wanted to do, at least in my mind at that time. And so I was walking through campus and I saw a sign that said that they were interviewing for real estate appraisers. And I was like,
oh, actually on campus. You actually were at a university or a college or however the name may have been, that they actually had on-campus recruiting for students.
Turns out that there was an appraiser there that day.
Oh, wow.
He wanted to add to his staff. He was an alumni, so he decided, hey, what better place to go and find a new recruit than my alma mater. And so,
now that makes a lot of sense. It's not exactly family, but it's kind of like family.
And so I was like, hey, those guys come into the office. They seem pretty cool. I think I want to hear more about this. So I went and I set up an interview. I went and I spoke to the two gentlemen that came in, and we hit it off really well. And matter of fact, when I was leaving, he said to me, he says, quite frankly, you're the only person we talked to today that was worth a damn. So, I stuck my chest out. I thought, man, I got this down, right?
And my smile is carrying me all the way through one and done another time.
That's it. So I go back, and of course I'm in Anderson, Indiana. This position was in Hamilton, Ohio. So I started packing my bags. Right? Figured, hey, I'm gonna be soon. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and I didn't hear anything. And
goodness,
I obviously back then, and I don't know whether it is as big as it is done as much today, but you were always told, like, as soon as you have an interview, you write up like a thank you for the interview.
Thank you note. Right? Oh yeah.
And so I sent that off. And then I got this letter in the mail. It says, I'm sorry, but we made our selection and you wasn't, one of the guys
that wasn't you. Oh my gosh. Oh no.
And so then in the playbook, the next thing was to write a letter and say, well, hey, thank you for considering me, understand, but if, in the future you think that you might be interested in hiring another person, please I want you to know that I'm still interested. Right.
Got it.
If you talk.
So did you send that letter?
I sent that letter.
Oh, you did?
And that's the way I explain it. Now, if you talk to the person who received the letter,
what did they receive?
Who is this cocky guy who's telling me I made a mistake? and that it's okay. He'll forgive me if I want to change my mind. I'll still
Buddy.
yeah. And obviously it's nowhere close to that, right? But he decided, you know what? I like his initiative. I like, you know what? I'm going to hire him too. And so he sent me back a letter and he goes, look, why don't you come on? Right. And that was
wow. So you didn't have to unpack.
I didn't have to unpack my bags.
And you did.
Yeah.
And you went across state lines. You went from Hoosier territory over to Buckeye territory.
That's it. Just across.
Might have been dangerous.
Yeah. Just across the line, Butler County borders, Indiana. And which is very interesting, being there in that greater Cincinnati market area. I actually spent for several years, southeastern Indiana was my territory. There, Cincinnati was growing. It was becoming a large bedroom community, a lot of new construction. It was exploding. And so a lot of people who had lived in the Ohio side who were migrating out, they were using their lenders, and, the lenders like, well, I don't have any Indiana appraisers, because everything was regional back in those days, right? So they said, hey, do you have anybody that can go to Indiana for us? And I went, hey, I'll do it. And so I spent a lot of time in southeastern Indiana doing appraisal work there. Long story short, I made the move to Buckeye, started doing appraisals. The guy they hired in front of me, I think he stayed on a year and then he moved on.
Okay.
But during that time, things got really slow. And so they even let a couple of appraisers go. And I figured, okay, well, I'm the last one in. I've got to be one of the first ones out.
Yeah, of course.
But it didn't happen that way. They kept me around. So
congratulations.
Kept working on.
Once again, that smile paid off for you, Bill.
There you go. Kept on working on that in that appraisal realm. And now here's the interesting part is that the guy that hired me and actually eventually ended up becoming my brother-in-law because I married his wife's sister. So
talk about building family around this profession that you didn't start into.
Yeah, I kind of did it the other way. Usually you got to have the family, and I'd say, no, well, let me do the appraisal first, and then I'll work family in later.
So what was it like for people that either may not be old enough or didn't start out in as you pointed out, in a smaller market area next to a larger city? What was it like joining a firm? Was it you and the new guy and the alum, and that was it? Or was it a little bit larger and you went on a lot of training? Like, what was that whole getting started like when you went from being behind a desk and the zoning side of things, and now you're in the field and doing research?
That was one of the most appealing things to me. I mean, because I thought, when I was talking to these appraisers, I was like, well, what do you do and how do you do it? And they're like, well, we have to go and be out in the field and, go to the houses and everything. But then we spend a lot of our time behind the desk working the appraisals up. And I was like, that's like perfect for me because I can't see myself sitting behind a desk all the time. But then, I don't want to be, out and about every single day either. Right. To me,
yes,
kind of breaking it up, and then being that I'm traveling all over the place and really I got to know the greater Cincinnati market area pretty well driving around as an appraiser, very quickly.
Yes.
So, that was one of the real appealing things to me about becoming an appraiser in the early days. I liked, I liked that piece. Probably one of the really fortunate things for me, and I think was a big part of developing as an appraiser and honing my craft, was that I went to an office every single day. So you got up, you went to the office, and we sat in a bullpen full of appraisers.
Oh, wow.
And so, we sat there every day working on appraisals, talking about appraisals. Hey, I got this really weird property, or I got this really weird situation. And they're like, oh, I've done one like that before. And they tell you about it. And just, being in that group and as iron would sharpen iron, I guess, if you want to use that same analogy, that was really, really big part of, and very valuable at that time of my career, just developing as an appraiser. So, of course, back in that day, you would type up the report.
Yes.
And I was new, so it would have to be reviewed, right? You'd have to have your appraisal reviewed.
Of course. I mean, you're brand new. You probably still had the shiny on you like a brand new penny that just got minted.
So to have it reviewed, you would print it out on the laser printer. We had a laser printer, which really...
You had a laser
printer.
Ooh, that's fancy.
We'd print that thing out, and then you would take it down and you'd hand it across the desk. And to let you know who my brother-in-law is, it's Ernie Durbin. And a lot of people, I'm sure, listening to this podcast knows who Ernie Durbin is. Yeah, and if you know anything about Ernie Durbin, he picks up his red pen and he's like, with this huge smile on his face, bigger than my smile.
That's hard to do, but okay.
Yeah. In his hand, and he would just start, and every single time I go down there, he said, he ain't going to find us. I got this.
So it was a competition. It was a matter of...
And then he would take it and circle something, and it would just make me so mad.
Just grind on you, huh? Oh, good.
And he got so much pleasure from it. But, ultimately, that was really good too, right? I mean, you sat there, it was immediate feedback. We had an opportunity to sit there and talk about things. Here's what I think, and, just all the back and forth. It's so valuable. And, I don't know that there's really very many opportunities like that these days, where a lot of times I think that if you complete your appraisal and you need someone to review it, well, they just log in and they review it, right?
Yes.
Instead of sitting there across the desk doing it that way. And then just having peer appraisers in a bullpen sitting, it's kind of funny. When things were really busy, I always got home late because I had to work. And then when things would slow down, I would still get home late. My wife goes, well, if it's slow, what? I mean, there was just too much fun that we were having in the office together.
So the power of the proximity, I think, sadly, and one of the things in COVID is that's been lost. I mean, online's nice and all, but it's just not the same as being sitting, like you said, a bullpen or some type of space, and that ability to have a connect where it's not, you don't feel like, oh, I'm imposing because I'm calling you on the phone or I'm connecting with you on some video or something. That's fantastic. You were there late in the evening, whether you're busy or things were a little slower. It's a great testament to the culture of the community.
Yeah. And, Cincinnati was a great market to learn, cut your teeth and grow as an appraiser. I mean, you have the urban area of Cincinnati plus Dayton to when I first started there, and you had the kind of the suburban sprawl or whatever. They were kind of two distinct cities, and then they kind of just started growing together down the I-75 corridor. So there was a lot of new construction occurring and a lot of experience in all three markets: urban, suburban, rural, lots of rural areas, in the area. So it was a great way to get a good taste of and well-rounded experience of all kinds of different property types and everything else. So
did you stay there until recently, or did you ultimately something come along and you change?
Yeah.
From what happened?
So 20 years. Worked 20 years as an appraiser in that market, field appraiser from 1990 to 2010.
That's amazing.
Is how long I did appraisals there.
Mm-hmm.
So I really haven't done a whole lot of field appraising since then, but 20 years,
2 decades of experience.
Yeah. So I mean, I really did a lot of work, during that time. We had a shop and it was innovative for the day. We incorporated processors into our process who, ultimately the orders would come in and they would prepare files, and, they would, pull the MLS, they pull the public record information, print it off, stick it in a file. They get us a map, right? You had to have a map because they would stick that in there. We had the form that we took out initially where, you just kind of, we had we had listed all the different quick list items, so to speak, that you would circle, and then you bring that back, and then the processor would essentially fill it all out into the form for you. We would even tell them which comparables that we were interested in and considering, that we drove by and took photos. And so they would pre-populate those into the grid. And once they got all of that in there, including our notes and everything, we came through and kind of reviewed the page 1, added our notes and additional information, went on to page 2, figured out which comps we wanted to use, deleted the ones we didn't, make our adjustments, write our reconciliation. Back then, it was 35 millimeter with glue sticks. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, do the glue stick. And then, once she was done, you'd print it off, and then the processor put all the photos down and draw all the lines and stick it in an envelope, and then when, obviously, as the years progressed and systems came online, they would actually log in and send the appraisal through the system to the client. So we really try to make us as efficient as we could by focusing on the appraisal piece, and using staff to do a lot of the other things that really did require our expertise. So, and I'm not too far from that same concept today or in any point in my appraisal career. I mean, to me, I kind of think that we should be focusing on our expertise, what we do best. And, if I can use somebody else to do some of the other work for me, then, I'm good with that. You just need to review it, make sure it's all good, make the changes if you need to make changes, and keep moving.
Kind of sounds like to me, I was recently at the dentist's office, and I think there must have been, 1, 2, 3 people that I interacted with before the dentist got there. And, I don't know, spent 10 minutes or so together. Didn't need a ton of time per se, but kind of sounds familiar. Just a little delegation of work based on the level of involvement or responsibility or complexity.
Right. Same thing with the doctor. I've got one person that takes me in and gets my blood pressure and weighs me and has a whole list of questions that they ask me, and writing all that down and a whole score of things and then, usually the doctor comes in and says, he looks at everything that was collected, asks you a few questions, and then they're like, okay, well, they'll be back in to finish things up, and they're gone. Right. So, very, very similar concept as way we based and ran our office.
Wow. So now I do know for a fact you actually left the Cincinnati area. How did you ever leave the wonderful middle Midwest?
Yeah. Well, back around 2008, there was a little bit of a crisis that had occurred.
No idea what you're talking about.
Well, so things got really difficult, and we started reporting that there was an oversupply of homes on the market, and back in that day, it wasn't received, all that well.
Are you kidding me? You mean telling people like the truth?
The truth.
Like breaking reality to them, and they're not excited to receive the news? It's just shocking.
Pretty much. And then it got even worse, when we started telling them the property values were declining. So.
Oh, yeah. Got to mark the box, and they blew a gasket.
Yeah. I mean, there were others that were marking those boxes, and they gained favor in the market. And, ultimately things kind of really started to get thin. We changed with the times. There were 2 companies that really wanted to know what the value was. And, that was REO, foreclosure. They wanted to know all the details. And also relocation. So did a lot of that type of work during those years. But ultimately, I was like, hey, maybe I ought to look at another kind of gig here. And there was an appraisal management company in California that was looking for a chief appraiser, and so I spoke with them, and they hired me, and so I packed up the family of 5 young boys.
Wow.
And we all gathered them around. I'm like, hey, we're going to go to California. Made them all sit down on the couch. I told them this thing. And so we we went out to California. I didn't stay there long. It was just short of 2 years. It turned out it wasn't a very good fit. There was a company here in Western New York that was looking for a chief appraiser, and so I came and spoke to them. And they say, "Hey, we want you, but you gotta move from San Diego to New York. Can you do that?"
Ooh, you were in San Diego. I mean, you weren't exactly in a bad place in California.
Yeah. And so I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So I sat all the kids down on the couch, and I said, "Hey, look, we're leaving San Diego. We're headed to New York, right?
We're going to be closer and more familiar to like Cincinnati all over again than San Diego."
Yeah, so we packed them all up and drove across the country again.
Again.
And for them, so when I first started in California, I actually commuted from Cincinnati, believe it or not. I'd leave on Sunday or Monday morning, would go out there, and then I would leave Thursday evening, and I would fly back. And I did that for like almost 8 months.
I did that for 18 months back and forth to Nashville. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then the family moved out there. We were there exactly 1 year as a family together. And then, I sat them down. So we're moving to New York. And so we moved here, and it kind of hit me one day. We had to have another family meeting, and I sat them all on the couch, and they looked at me. They said, "Where are we moving now?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, we're not moving anywhere. Just, talk about something else, whatever it was." But it kind of at that point, I was like, "Look, I need to kind of put some roots down and stay." So I've been here ever since. That moved back in 2011. I've worked for several different companies, a couple of them out in California again, one in North Carolina. But, I've always kind of said, "Hey, look, I need to hang out here at least until, all my boys are done and ready to move on themselves," which I'm exceptionally close right now. And
congratulations. Close as in last one finished up high school or last one finished up college?
the last one is in college. Yeah. So.
Oh my goodness. You've crossed the finish line for all practical purposes.
For the most part.
Congratulations on that. So a lot of people will never get the opportunity, Bill, to be in a company and ascend to the role of chief appraiser. You've had the opportunity to do that at a couple different firms. As you've stepped into those different roles at different firms, how has that responsibility changed over the last, well, really, as you pointed out, like more than a decade?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has and it hasn't, I guess, to some degree. When I first started, it was 2010, and there were a lot of AMCs opening their doors in 2010, and there was a lot of things happening. You had the HBCC, which then went on to Dodd-Frank, and lots of regulation occurring that needed navigation. That was, it kind of comes in spurts. So it was a lot of it right then, and then, it kind of evened out for a while. And then it, obviously, here several years ago after the last crisis, now all the AMCs had to be registered, like they did with the appraisers the first time around, back in the late 80s, late 80s with the savings and loan crisis. So, it's really interesting because I became an appraiser right when licensing came out, right? When I first started in Ohio, you just had to call yourself an appraiser. And if you can give someone gave you business, you were. Of course, that was a very short-lived for me because then, licensing came along and I did all of that. And then, I kind of also lived through that same cycle with the licensing of appraisal management companies, because I've worked for several of those. So, there's just lots of regulation that's occurred, throughout the years, and there's big changes occurring now on all fronts. And a lot of that has to do with, the whole process, the bifurcated and hybrid process and the form redesign all of those things. So it'll be some pretty interesting years, I think, that we've got coming up here, soon as well.
Got it. That's phenomenal. So how was it for you? And this, again, another perspective to give people an understanding of what might be available to them if they pursue that path, to go from being a field appraiser, somebody who maybe is covering a particular market area or a territory, to moving into a role where you're not in the field but still very much connected to it as a chief appraiser. Do you spend, and I'm sure it's different from different firms, maybe kind of shed light, like, hey, some firms operate one way, some firms operate different. But how do you go from being a field appraiser to being a chief appraiser? Aside from just giving yourself a title, much like, hey, I'm an appraiser in Ohio, or hey, I'm a coach these days.
Yeah. Everybody always encouraged me to be a teacher. And for whatever reason, they're like, hey, I think you'd be a great teacher. You ought to be a teacher. Matter of fact, when I was in college, when I started at Anderson University, I went there to be I wanted to be an athletic trainer.
Oh, really?
So I went through the first year, started the second year, and loved it. The Colts were doing their training camp, so I got some exposure to them. And the head trainer there also worked for the Chicago Bears, And so I was, I thought this is really what I wanted to do. And then my second year, they're like, hey, you also need to get your teaching degree. And I'm like, what? I thought, so my dad was a teacher, right? And I just didn't want to be a teacher.
Oh, okay.
Not only my dad, my aunt, my uncle, my whole family's full of teachers. And I just didn't want to do it. And so I said, well, why do I got to do that? And I said, well, most likely you'll work as a teacher, and then you can be a trainer for the high school as a stipend. And I'm like, that's totally opposite of what I want. I want to be a trainer. I don't want to be a teacher and get extra dough and so I stopped, and I just went into business management because I didn't know what else to do. And so that's what I went. But as much as I tried to avoid the whole teaching thing, there's a lot of times I feel like that's a big portion of the chief appraiser job, and because you got to take a lot of things and help the others, that you work with who don't know all the ins and outs and things about appraisal, and I guess educate them, right? About how we do things, so to speak. And then from a certain perspective, sometimes, that also comes in, in handy when there's new changes and things that are occurring, and getting that information out to, to even appraisers or others. God love them, they're working their butts off doing appraisal, and sometimes don't have their finger on the heartbeat of everything that's occurring. So sometimes you can that it's helpful to bring all that information together and set it out so that everybody else can kind of get up to speed as well.
Yeah, get a sense of that. And then for you, is there any like chief appraiser school that somebody like you goes to? Back then they didn't have, I think they had listservs back in the day, because if I recall correctly, it was probably about the closest thing you had to kind of some sharing of information. Was there like for instance, the Bible of real estate, the CR?
No, you know what? I really got it.
Was there the good book? Maybe there's good. Maybe Pastor Durbin was praying over what's going on here, but there you go. You got something there.
No, there's no school, and if there is, let me know. I probably ought to go. But
no comment.
Yeah. I'll be the first to sign up if there's chief appraiser school. No, it's really kind of something that you learn, by the seat of your pants, and as you move along. One of the requirements of my first chief appraiser job is, they said, hey, are you an SRA? And I'm like, no. And they go, well, we want you to do that. So I think I did it. I pulled it together all in about 3 months. It was a lot of a lot of work.
But yeah, it was it was a lot of work. I remember that.
Yeah.
For those that don't know what it is, and I'm a big believer in education and everything you can do to strengthen your own ability, as well as your competency and credibility to solve problems. But what is what you did, if you want to explain it.
Yeah. So, they have all of the qualifying education that you got to do to become, first you have to be a certified appraiser, right? And once you get through that, then you have to take all of the additional education that's required to be an SRA. I did that in the evenings, like I'd come home from work and I'd sit down and I'd go through that. And then, of course, you had to go to a testing center to take all the exams. But I kind of pushed through that in a very short time period. I can't confirm, but I do think that I had a little bit of influence on the change that the Appraisal Institute had for the SRA. At the time, when I said that I wanted to be, wanted to do it, they said, "Oh, well, what did you?" And I said, "Well, I took all it," and they said, "Oh, well, that was 20 years ago." So
yeah, that's when I was in college. What do you expect?
You can't use that education. I said, it's USPAP 15-hour basic appraisal principles, basic appraisal procedures. And I said, you're going to make me retake those courses? And they're like, well, yeah, because you took them so long ago. And I said, I've been an appraiser for 20 years, right? I said, and so I got out my pen and I started writing, and they ultimately came back and said, okay, we'll waive those courses. You don't have to take those. So I got I got them to waive that for me personally. And then I went on, and I think it was just me, but shortly after that, they said that if you were a certified appraiser already, you didn't have to take any of the qualifying education to become that certified appraiser. You only had to take, the additional education. But you went that, and then you went and did I did the demo alternative.
Oh, you did? Okay. And what is that for people that aren't familiar with the advanced education opportunities that exist in the industry?
Yeah. So ultimately, everybody that wants to, become an SRA or MAI or any of those designations, you have to do a demo report. And it was one of the bigger stumbling blocks, because essentially they told you to go write this demo report, isolated in a silo all by yourself, writing this thing up. And a lot of people just, at that point, without the discipline or a deadline or anything else like that, they never got past that piece. So the Institute came up as an alternative where, I call it Appraisal Hell Week. I don't know whether you did that.
I did. I've done the SRA, I've done the MAI, I've got a number of other designations. I've had sheer pleasure. I'm like, wow, this is worse than going back to college.
It's funny because we did, and it was over. It started on a Thursday, and I think it ended on a Monday or Tuesday or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 6 or 7 days or something like that.
And, you rented a hotel and you think, okay, well, I'll go to class during the day, and the evenings, kind of relax or whatever. And boy, you left class and you were in a book clear to late hours in the morning, and then you were getting up early trying to write things up before you went back to class. And at least that's the way. Maybe I'm a little slower, I don't know, but for me, that's how that weekend went. And it was funny because one of the guys that sat next to me, I can't remember where he came. I did it in Columbus. I can't remember where he came in, but it was either his wife or his girlfriend was supposed to come in and visit, during the weekend. And that's a bad idea. He called her up and said, "Don't come." And she's like, What do you mean? I have all these things planned. He goes, "Do not come here." He goes, "I do not have time." She goes, "What do you mean you don't have time? You got all evening." He goes, "No." And I can hear him, and it was funny, right? I was laughing because she was, she goes, "You just want to hang out with the boys in the evening." And he's like, "No, seriously, there's no time for you to come here." So that was a funny story during. But that was about the only.
It's even funnier that you were the one. See, it was fun because you weren't making that phone call to somebody else, getting your, chewed out for changing the plans because they didn't understand what they were getting into before they got there. Oh, good.
One of the big things I learned, and two things. One is that part of that was you had to take some type of writing course. I think it's probably one of the best courses I ever took. How to, and it's not, has nothing really to do with appraisal. It's how to communicate your findings in a report. And that was probably one of the best courses that I had as to help me as an appraiser communicate my findings. And then the other one was just driving home the absolute importance and necessity of your final reconciliation and writing your argument, right? And so those were the two really big things that I took out of that. And I would highly, you should do it. I mean, all appraisers should go through Hell Week. So
I think there's something to be said that writing course is. I've done the residential one and the commercial one, but they're, unless you were an English major or you around literature and what have you, effective writing is not something that I found a lot of teaching on, classes in, but here's part of that progression. It was definitely the case, and I am sure, Bill, that you are just such a better chief appraiser because you can communicate effectively. Somebody thinks so, at least.
There's all kinds of tools. I'm a big Grammarly fan, right? I don't know whether you know anything about Grammarly or not.
A couple people on my team use it. They love it.
So, it's I'll write something up and I run it through Grammarly and just to kind of clean things up, knock the edges off, and if it can help me communicate my thoughts and ideas better, I'm all for it, right? Because ultimately, again, right back to what we were talking about, communicating clearly so that you're getting your message and your point across. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're an appraiser that kind of struggles in that area, I take the course, right? But that's one thing. But hey, use tools. If there's a tool out there available that you can utilize that helps you be better, I say use it. And for me, Grammarly, I love it. I've had it for years. So
that's fantastic. I mean, speaking of tools that really enhance your ability to work, you shared that once you made that relocation with the family, you're like, hey, I'm not uprooting them again, but yet you have worked with firms literally across the country. And from that standpoint, although with your start there in the Cincinnati and southeastern Indiana market areas, really have dealt with properties all across the country in your roles. How have you found that to really expand or contribute to both your, knowledge base or capabilities, as well as the people that you've had an opportunity to work with?
It's interesting, and anybody so one of the other things that I think every appraiser should do is that they should work as a reviewer for either a lender or an appraisal management company.
Say a little more about that. I agree, actually. I think it's a phenomenal learning experience, but I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, first off, sometimes, and not so much now, but in the earlier days, the way, believe it or not, the way appraisals are written up and communicate and everything could almost be regionalized. Like some people in certain regions did things differently than others. And sometimes you could take the address totally off of it. And if you're a reviewer that's used to reading through reports, you can almost tell where that thing's coming from the way it's written up, right? Because it kind of has a certain style and flavor of a certain region. So, and I'm not saying that any region's better than anything else, but I'm a big fan of perspective. I like to look at something from every single angle, right? I want that perspective from every different way. And, I mean, how do you become a chief appraiser? I don't know. I mean, you look at all these reports and you hear a lot of different theories and perspectives on how things are doing and how people are doing things. And it's just really eye-opening. Things that I'd never even thought about. And I looked at it and said, hey, that's not a bad idea. I like that. And then there's sometimes where I'm like, that's not good at all. But ultimately, it's a learning experience from just seeing how appraisers are doing their work, not only from all the different regions, but all these different appraisers, right?
Yes.
I talked about how in the beginning I thought I was really fortunate to sit in the bullpen with a bunch of appraisers, and that's because, we all rubbed off each other and we didn't all do things exactly the same, but we had each other there to kind of do that. Well, I mean, if you're a reviewer, this stuff's coming in and you're looking at how all of these different appraisers are doing these things. And I just think that's educational in and of itself. One of the things about being a good reviewer, and I've said this time and time again, you can be a great appraiser, but sometimes not the best reviewer. I mean, if you're someone that thinks that every report has to be written the exact way you would do it, you're not gonna do really well in the whole review portion of things. But yeah, I think it's really important to get to see all those different perspectives, and then what I think that any appraiser that works as a reviewer, I know that sometimes it's really easy to get irritated with what they're asking for and everything else. But I think that if you stood in their shoes for a little while, you kind of see, how there can be some challenges in on that side of the report as well. I had an appraiser call me once. He was so upset. He's like, Bill, this reviewer, they asked me to do this, and it's already in your. If you just read the report, it's in the report. And I pulled it up, and I said, "You're absolutely right. That isn't a report." I said, "No, he sent you 5 things." I said, "That one's in there." I said, "But what about the other?" They make mistakes, and they're going to ask for the thing.
Oh, you are human being.
I mean, but and he made 1, and you made 4. So
yeah. Oh man, love that. You've had, because your opportunity to work with a number of different firms as a leader, as a chief appraiser over the last, say, 5 to 7 years, and you've been involved in some very interesting market spaces as well as technologies. Tell us a little bit about that perspective, because that's something that a lot of people also don't necessarily think about when they think about chief appraiser.
Yeah, no, you're right. My first 2 companies, they were strictly, traditional appraisals. That makes a little more sense. It was in the earlier days. We were doing 1004s and 1073s and 2055s and 1025s, and the appraisers doing inspection, on all of those. And so that was really kind of that portion. I was really interested in the bifurcated approach, and wanted to know more about that. And so one of the reasons I moved was I had an opportunity to work for a company that was kind of on the leading edge of doing some of that stuff. And my curiosity is one thing that kind of pushes me into certain spaces, because I like learning about new things. So I had some pretty decent exposure in that regard. And then, one of my opportunities was to work for a lender. I always wonder what it would be like on the other side of the fence. I've always...
What was that like?
Well, I mean, it was the same, but different, which is one of the things I like. So I like the fact that I've got already a good, strong base, and understanding, but I'm learning new things. Kind of like when we were talking about, you got this platform and people, you keep folding. Well, I would think that was before maybe we started.
Yeah.
But,
that's fine.
you can have a base, and then you can bolt things on. And if you come in after all the bolt-ons are made, it's can be a little confusing. But if you're there from the very beginning with all the bolt-ons, then it's easier to stay up to date and operate. And I guess it's kind of that same thing. The lender side was a little bit different, but not only that, it was private lending. There was a lot of freedom on that side that I really enjoyed, and we ordered a lot of non-traditional products and a lot of traditional products.
And if I may, Bill, it's something I know a ton about, but not everybody does. And when you talk about, in this case, I kind of refer to them as NBL, non-bank lender, because they're not backed by the government. It's not Fannie Mae, it's not Freddie Mac, it's not FHA, it's not VA. And then you talk about non-standard products, and someone has a need and they're looking to work with people that can solve that need. And the company you happen to work with, ones we've worked with as well, we've worked with a lot of their peers. If you could share a little more about that, because in some parts of the country, people have never had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about the private lending space and how it's a little bit different. We have a lot of freedom with the type of freedom with respect to what our investors will accept. But we have there's different products that we can order for different purposes, and some of those are some of the proprietary hybrid products, where someone does the property data collection and then it's presented to an appraiser for them to complete at their desk. I've seen different products in that realm, a qualitative and quantitative approaches. A lot of times someone looks at the qualitative and they go, well, that's a new way of doing things. And I'm like, actually, no, that's a really old way of doing things, right? There really isn't anything new there. We were very, obviously, I mean, if you're working in that fix and flip realm, then you've got to have two values. You've got to have the as is value and the as repaired. And some of the challenges with appraisers would be that, in the as is condition, they'd say, well, this is never going to fly with financing given the condition I have to make it subject to. And I'm like, no, I have to have an as is value. They said, well, yeah, but
got to have an as is here.
Land on this. I said, that's a good thing, because we ain't sending it to them.
Did you read the engagement?
Yeah.
It's like, hello, I communicated what we need.
Yeah. So they're like, well, I'm never going to find a comp that, that's in the same condition that this is. And I'm like, well, look, ultimately it doesn't have to be the same condition, right?
No.
Who's the typical buyer of that property? And that's an investor. And so what you need to do, instead of trying to find, instead of the mindset of what's the typical comparable for the investor? And that's the one that needs repair regardless of what exactly is wrong. So one might have a foundation problem, another might have a roof problem or whatever it is. But those are the properties that are competing against each other in the typical buyer's mind in that market. And so those are your comparable properties.
That's great perspective. Absolutely great perspective. Unfortunately, I think a little bit of the economy got a hold of that company and you didn't.
Yeah, I can only speculate. I mean, they never consulted with me. About
how could someone not consult?
Yeah, I certainly had a lot to say, as you can tell. But yeah, for whatever reason, they seem to think that they had it without asking me. I can only speculate on what the reason why they made the moves they did. Finance America is still very involved in the reverse lending space. And matter of fact, they acquired AAG, which is one of the largest reverse mortgage lenders in the country. And so ultimately, just in my opinion, I think that's where most of their focus, where they want to put most of their focus. Now, I don't know. That's just Bill sitting in his chair. But
Bill, you don't have to be a wizard to look at the demographics and say, "Ooh, people getting a little older. Going to be a lot more of those reverse mortgage possibilities out there than there have been in the past," and making a strategic move into a market segment.
Yeah. I mean, we were doing well. Things were going great. It's just, I think that it was a a change in the focus. So, and you're allowed to do that. So,
hey, that's he who has the cash makes the rules. So
that's the rule.
Yes, that's the goal of the rule. So you've recently taken on a new position. Where are you at, and what are you doing? And I think it's a fascinating perspective.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear it from you.
So, I mean, look, I've been working from my house since 2014. Every once in a while they'd fly me to an office and I'd hang out for a few days and come back home.
Yes.
But, I haven't actually walked into an office since 2014. And interesting enough, I found a company that's right here in Buffalo. So I go to the office, not every day.
You actually have a car now? You have a car and drive somewhere?
Well, I have.
It's a scooter. No, I'm sorry. Maybe a
Jeep Wrangler. I'm a big Wrangler guy. If anybody knows me, they know how much I love my getting out in my Jeep and playing in the mud.
Love it.
But yeah, it's where I'm at right now is Mueller Reports. And Mueller Reports has been in business for over 40 years, and their
40?
Yeah, their primary focus over those 40 years was inspection field services for insurance companies. And
why would insurance companies need that?
I don't know. I don't get too much in the insurance side. Look,
I'll answer it for you. You know the answer, don't you?
No, not really. I mean, I don't.
Okay. Well, I've owned a lot of buildings. I've done a ton of investment. So depending on where your property is located and depending on who the insurance carrier is and what their policy procedures are, what their ratings are, they do a field check. Mm-hmm. So like, without going into any details, I'm kind of closing on Monday and give them the address and I get a phone call. They're like, hey, I'm just walking around the property you're going to buy. I'm like, oh, well, I'm sorry. No, normally it happens after it's already closed. Actually, they're doing kind of a quality control check on it. And the person walks around and it's just an exterior and acknowledgement. And they're just making sure that what someone was told on the phone in terms of the rating of the property actually matches the grading as it relates to their risk.
Yeah, I think they're maybe looking at materials and some things like that as well.
Is the roof in solid condition or is it buckling?
Yeah.
Is the mortar falling out? Is the porch falling over you?
I mean, I do know. I mean, familiar to a certain extent. I mean, what they do. They go both interior and exterior.
Oh, they do interior.
There's all kinds of different. That's not my focus there, and they don't. I don't think they want it to be.
I could imagine in your role.
Yeah.
What is your role?
So my role is. So, they've been doing this whole field inspection services for a really long time. And, yes. With the movement and the change to having, the bifurcated approach where someone's doing the inspection on the behalf of the appraiser and presenting that information for them to complete at their desk, they're like, hey, we're set up perfectly for this. We
got it.
And all of their field inspectors are W-2 employees, and they cover the entire nation. They already have quite a bit of experience in doing the inspection piece, and so they've already have background checks and the whole deal. So we just really kind of need to provide some education to fill the gap between what they already know and what the requirements of the agencies, have. And so, it was a perfect, kind of transition. And they do a lot of those. But then, they also want to complete the appraisal portion too, whenever that's a part of the equation. And that's where I come in for the most part. I mean, the inspection for the appraisal, obviously, I'm involved in that to a certain degree, but it's the valuation portion on the back end, and they want to keep the same model, so they look for W-2, employee appraisers. So they're not an appraisal management company. That's one of the new things for me is working for a large national appraisal firm.
Oh, okay.
And so instead of having panel appraisers who are independent contractors, all the appraisers are employees. So That's where I come in. That's where my focus is on that valuation portion of that system. We don't do a single appraisal where the appraiser goes out and inspects the property. Every single appraisal we do is the appraiser does from their desk. So,
awesome.
If you are one of our appraisers, it's not like you can't still do work for others. That's obviously something that we're still okay with. We do want you to give us a little bit of priority, and
of course.
But yeah, it can turn out to be a really, really good direction.
It's a great way to be able to tap into decades of experience and meet technology where it's at.
Yep.
Like I said, you're getting a specialist. In this case, 40 years of experience at a firm that has been doing all types of property reports, many times with a potentially, I won't say necessarily, but potentially the more discerning eye because of the insurance rating where that property piece really matters because there's money on the line now and somebody's writing a check when there's an issue or some type of damage problem, et cetera.
Right. You hear a lot of appraisers and they're concerned that the person collecting the data is, an Uber driver or a pizza delivery guy.
They might be, but not over at Mueller's, what you're telling me.
Not at Mueller. And, the other piece is, well, I don't even know who this person is. And at Mueller, they're a fellow employee. And look, if you want one, we'll set up for you guys to have a cup of coffee together. They're always available. If you have a question, you can reach out to them, talk to them. Our staff would be more than willing to facilitate that meeting. So we think that it's a great model, a team approach, so to speak. The people who are in the office and who are running things, we refer to them as field support services for our appraisers, right? They're there to help you be successful as the appraiser, much like when I talked about in my experience how we had staff that kind of did a lot of things for us to help us be as efficient as possible. We try to do that to we like to take that approach as much as we can.
It's always interesting and insightful to see the different ways people are approaching it. I know we've previously talked about the impact that many times happens, and it sometimes seems like it's coming out of the blue because it came from another industry first. And there was a great book a number of years ago by Christensen called Crossing the Chasm. And that's the whole point of this. And it's written back in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, or headed towards 2000, that so many technologies that show up and disrupt one industry aren't only disrupting that industry because people weren't aware of everything else that was been going on for a long period of time somewhere else. And it builds steam, it gets perfected. And then someone says, well, if I'm doing it here, I can do it there as well. And then it jumps, as the Crossing the Chasm reference. And it's, oh my goodness, it's taking over. It's taking over here. It already took over some places. So sounds like maybe you're going to be in version 2 of that.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, but look, if you're an appraiser and you're interested in working with us, I'd love to chat with you about it. If I can shamelessly plug.
Please do. Hey, Bill, this is your podcast. We're just appreciate you sharing a little insight and perspective.
Yeah, reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. William Waltenbaugh, WALTENBAUGH.
Just look for the big smile when you click on LinkedIn. Just type in the big smile. You'll probably get right to it.
Send me a message. I'd love to chat with you and see how we could partner together and be successful. There's when things were really busy, we had some appraisers doing really well in this model. So not that they're not doing well now, but they were doing. There was some pretty decent
earnings.
Yeah,
got it. So Bill, we always liked, as we kind of move towards wrapping up, always like to ask the question, given all that you've experienced from your home office there in Western New York, formerly Southern Ohio, in the Indianapolis market area, you look out over the next, say, 5, maybe 10 years, like what has you optimistic or excited about the future as opposed to pessimistic?
Yeah, We've always been on the cutting edge, or I like to think that I've always been a little bit on the cutting edge. We were one of the first ones to have digital cameras, the ones that look like binoculars, and made a big clunking sound when you push the button. And it only held so many photos. So if you had a big inspection day, you had to take two of them. And I think they cost like $1,500 a piece or something like that. The laser printer that I mentioned, how we ran the office. I'm not afraid of change in the future and technology. And, I don't know, maybe someday it'll bite me in the butt. I don't know. But I mean, to me, it's fascinating. And I think that these are all tools. I don't think appraisers are going to be replaced. I think that there's always a place where you're going to need someone to look at a model's results or anything else and say, does that, meet the rule of reasonableness, you need to, there's going to be the best involvement is a combination of both. Use the tools that can make you more efficient, allow you to study and examine larger sets of data, versus just a handful because of the limitations of time and everything else. And so, I'm really kind of excited. I know I said that when I got in the industry, one of my favorite things was being out in the field half the time and being behind the desk half the time. Now that I'm older, I really just kind of prefer to stay behind the desk. I go out there and you gotta battle the heat or the snow or the cold or the ice, and you gotta battle the traffic and the pets and people being sick in houses and everything else. And if someone can gather the data on my behalf, and I feel really good about it and think that I can produce credible assignment results, I just as soon stay right here and do it from anywhere I want to in the country. I don't have to be in Buffalo or Indiana or California or Cincinnati or anywhere else. Anywhere I want to be, send me the information and I'll do it for you. So in 10 years, if I decided to retire from the chief appraiser gig, I could totally see waking up in the morning, someone opening up my inbox and, have a couple of appraisals in there where someone's already done all that work, and I'll sit down and, over a cup of coffee and breakfast and everything else, work up an appraisal, maybe two, who knows, using all the tools and everything that we have available, and then take the rest of the afternoon to explore wherever I am in the country.
Well, that's phenomenal, Bill. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, that's just one of those things, and your background as well as your initiative really highlight how many different opportunities there are in many parts of the country and many different segments of the industry. And for a lot of people, they've maybe only had one or two positions or one or two types of roles. And you've touched on there's a lot of different responsibilities out there and a lot of different ways to engage. And maybe one day soon, somebody else could follow in your footsteps as well and move on from Cincinnati and be a chief appraiser in a couple different parts around the country.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, I encourage everybody, look at things from different perspectives. Maybe make a little bit of a change. If you're getting tired of one thing, keep what you built on and add something else. Look at it from a different perspective. And, the one company I work for, the president there, she would always say we're a community of learners, and you never stop learning. And so, yeah, I mean, I take that to heart. I like learning new things, and looking at things from different perspectives and building on, what I know and adding to it. So
that's fantastic. Well, Bill, I just want to say thank you again for joining us here in season 2 on Perusing's The Power of Values podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You're welcome. Well, once again, we just want to say thanks. Please be sure to continue to share this and enjoy it. But at the same time, don't just be a hearer of the word, but also be a doer of the word. As you can take away from what Bill has shared with us, there's a lot of application and a lot more opportunity going forward. You mentioned big data sets. We've heard some things from other guests this season as well. There are more opportunities coming in the space of valuation from a bigger picture, not just a narrower piece of appraisal. And I am excited about the future, and I have no idea what's around the corner. But I'd just rather be excited about it than worried, because I'm just not a fan of worry. And I see, Bill, you're smiling.
Absolutely.
I think Bill's going to thumbs up on that one. So until next time, thanks so much, and have a fantastic summer.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Pa Roo Zing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Pa Roo Zing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.